Hello, everyone. It is December 21st, 2024. I definitely have a headache today, but I am going to persevere and make this particular video. This video today is going to be about lonely people. Maybe I'll call it Look at All the Lonely People. I think that's a line in a Beatles song, but anyway, the reason I'm doing that is because I woke up bright and early this morning. I turned on my social media and it was noted that a gentleman that was roughly my age had passed away. This guy would go to a bar that I would frequent quite often. I didn't even know the guy's name, but I would always kind of say hi to him, so on, etc. A lot of people did. He'd always kind of mind his own business and sit in a corner. And if there was conversation to be had, maybe he would intervene a little bit, but he wouldn't speak too much. And he was definitely a loner and maybe even a lonely person. But someone who mentioned it had a picture of her and him together. And there were very few comments on his passing, which was heartbreaking. I wanted to hear a funny story about him. I wanted to hear about how interesting he was. I wanted to hear about his passions. I wanted to hear about his family. I wanted to hear that he was loved from someone within our circle of friends, and I didn't see that, and that made me sad. That made me really sad, being so close to Christmas and maybe just being like a quick mention from a couple people isn't like how he should have gone out. He should have some people that write very in-depth little stories about him and tell us why he was so lovable and tell us why he's going to be missed and tell us how unlucky we are that such a good person will no longer be in our presence. And it reminded me of someone else I was acquainted with that had passed away 2 or 3 years ago. Now, this person I would have a very little interaction with either. She was definitely a loner too. But ultimately, I did have one really good conversation with her. This was a little bit before I had to move, so I couldn't see her anymore. But I thought, man, upon the conclusion of our conversation, it was a little frustrating. We could have talked for quite some time, but we never did. We never really took advantage of that. We got along pretty well, and I was like, man, she would have definitely been a friend. But I found out she had passed away as well, and it was just briefly mentioned, and there were very few people that commented on her as well. And it was just sad because once that was mentioned, it was done. It was like the person never existed outside of those little comments. Now, I'm sure somewhere along the line they have family or a couple really good friends that maybe just don't feel comfortable expressing how they feel, or maybe they do, but in a different fashion altogether. Social media should absolutely never define a person, but it is visible, and a lot of people that knew them would be reading this, and the hope is that more people would speak about it or feel comfortable to provide an obituary, to provide a good story, so on, etc. And not seeing that happen again is slightly heartbreaking. I don't like being lonely, and I don't understand why I am so lonely right now. Granted, things aren't going so well for me. Part of that's my fault, part of that's just like circumstance, but I'm lonely, like really lonely, and it's gotten to a point where it's starting to like wear down on me. I'll give you a story. The other night, I was at a bar. I grabbed something to eat, and grabbed a drink, and I go outside briefly and I have a cigarette, and this younger girl comes out and she asks if she could have one. I give her one. End of our conversation. Later on that same evening, I go out to have another cigarette, and I notice she comes up to me again, and she's like, hey, and she's like kind of winking and kind of pursing her lips a little bit, being real weird and flirtatious, and like moving around like a little bit seductively. It was odd. It didn't seem right. And again, I want to like make mention that she's a lot younger than me, probably like 22, 23, a grown woman, but still, it's just like a big age gap here. And I'm not understanding what she's doing. She wants to borrow another cigarette. She wasn't doing this previously. So I say, here you go. Here's a cigarette. And she was like, oh, thank you so much. She was like kind of pouring on this like, big thank you, and kind of like almost again being real flirty and over the top with it as well. And I kind of looked to my left, and I noted that her friends were recording this interaction, and they were making a fool out of me. And that kind of hurt my feelings. It hurt my feelings, one, because she had a cigarette from me, earlier in the evening, and she didn't need to do that, and I gave her what she asked for. And this particular time, well, it was an event. And who started that? Whose idea was it? Was it hers, or was it her friends? And what were they trying to accomplish exactly? I think on some level they saw a guy who was lonely, and a middle-aged guy who was lonely, overweight, and would probably like the attention of a younger girl, so they decided to make an event out of it and show how easily manipulated maybe I could be because of that. They saw that that I noted them recording the video, and they got embarrassed. I didn't say anything to them, but they stopped. They kind of turned around, and they weren't really like laughing at me after that. I think they maybe felt actually a little bit bad. So that happened. And what also happened was something I really didn't like to see, but within the group that I knew. So these are like someone I'm acquainted with. A guy saw it go down as well, and he goes up to him and he goes, "I would like you to delete that." And the girls were like, "Hey, we didn't mean anything about it." And again, very sternly, and this is a big guy, and he's a motorcycle rider, long hair, and he said, "You need to delete that." And I could see that her hand was shaking a little bit, and she proceeded to delete the video. And he kind of looks at me and he's like, "Man, they were making a fool out of you, and you saw it. You should have said something. You can't let people do that to you, dude." And I really just don't understand what was the point of the video, I guess. I didn't really take too much offense to it, maybe because I don't care too much, and maybe that's a good thing. But I feel like my loneliness, how obvious like my true loneliness was on display, and they were taking advantage of that, perhaps. Look at all the lonely people. There's one right there, and let's go like flirt with this guy and get exactly what we need from him. Who knows? But it was slightly embarrassing, the whole thing, as it was like played out. I really didn't want them to have to delete the video. I don't know what they were going to do with the video. What really wouldn't have been that funny if they posted it or anything like that. It's essentially me giving this person a cigarette. So that's like the end of it. But it is what it is. So I guess like my advice from this, I don't know. It's easier said than done to not be lonely, right? I think it's like something you become. It becomes a part of your identity, a loner, and that's not a good thing, because people tend maybe not to remember loners as well. So expand, get the friends that you can, right? Because you never know what can happen, and you never know when people's perception of you changes and they label you, and all of a sudden, even if you don't want to be a loner anymore, you just are labeled a loner, because that's who you are. That's who people like describe you. Oh, the loner. And again, as you get older, there is nothing romantic or cool about being a loner. It's just bad news. It's just bad news. And being alone on the holidays sucks. And here I am, alone on the holidays with a headache. About to go to the gym again, though. But with a headache. And don't be like me. Have a good one.